Yo, what's happening, guys? How are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to continue some of our Q&A from last week. So last week, you may remember that I did have my first Q&A in the last several months, which was a ton of fun. Of course, I put the call-outs on Twitter for you guys to ask me questions. I got a whole bunch of questions. I answered 6 of them, and of course, that was honestly less than half of the questions that I got. And so I figured that it would be kind of fun to kind of go back and pick up some of the other questions that I didn't have a chance to answer and answer them and get some video game topics to discuss. And I always love doing these and giving you guys shout outs and responding directly to you, via your questions that you ask me on Twitter. It's a ton of fun. You guys seem to like it, and I always have a blast. A lot of great questions I didn't have a chance to get to, and so honestly, let's go ahead and just answer a couple more. So today's first question comes to us from Brian at BrianJedi82 on Twitter. What is up, Brian? He asks me, what is it about the Metroid franchise that you think has prevented it from being more successful? Seems most games sell about 1 million or so, and that's it. And so Brian is totally true. Metroid, for all of its popularity and all of its great reviews over the years, is not the biggest selling franchise, especially when you compare it to some of Nintendo's other huge sellers like Mario and Zelda and Smash Brothers and Mario Kart and things like that. That's not really Metroid. Like he says here, most of the games average around 1 million units sold. I think Metroid Prime, which is the highest selling of all the Metroid games, sold close to 2 million, or maybe even just over 2 million if I'm not mistaken. And that's about it. And again, Nintendo's other franchises sell in the tens to 20s of millions sometimes. It's really crazy. And so why has Metroid never become a huge franchise like those other ones? Well, part of it we already know is the fact that Metroid has already just struggled in Japan. So that's something working against it right away, is the Japanese audience, for some reason, never really picked up on Metroid. Going back even to the very original game on the NES, which is very sad to me. I think the Japanese audience is missing, in my opinion, the best franchise in gaming, and of course one of Nintendo's most important franchises and longest running. But they're just not into it, and so that's fine. That takes care of part of the reason we don't see huge sales. The other reason, honestly, is I think Nintendo has kind of struggled to really understand the best way to market Metroid. Because on the surface, you would think that maybe it's really easy to market Metroid. Like, hey, look at this franchise, featuring this badass female bounty hunter. It's really sci-fi. It's got like a kind of a serious, mature kind of look to it. It's a bunch of shooting, and you're upgrading things, and you're fighting monsters and aliens and stuff. And so, like, yeah, that's great stuff. Like, sci-fi action alien killing video game seems like the perfect recipe for a successful franchise. And while Metroid isn't not successful, let's not be crazy. It's not that the franchise doesn't have success. But the reason I don't think it's much bigger than that is because despite the fact that Metroid seems like that on the surface, there's actually a lot more to the games than just that. Like, they're kind of cerebral in the way that you go about them. I think that, it's not like a Halo game, right? Like, Metroid Prime is first person, but it's not that it appeals to the Halo audience, because it's not just a bunch of machine guns and just mindless shooting. It's about being smart. It's about being careful. It's about moving very slowly. It's about backtracking and solving puzzles and finding upgrades to get yourself into new areas. And most sci-fi alien shooter games, like, they're not that way. They're not that clever. They're just more about the chaos and the balls to the wall action. And Metroid isn't an action game. And so I think that, the inability for people to kind of put that together in their brains, like, oh, it's a sci-fi alien shooter game, but it's also a slow, methodical puzzle game. And so I just think that people haven't understood that. Nintendo hasn't found the best way to get that messaging across. And I just think that that's part of why people haven't gravitated towards it the same way they have something like a Zelda or a Mario or a Mario Kart. Next question comes to us from Mighty Ryan at Mighty Ryan 1337. And he asks me, so now that we know the Xbox Series X is a 12 teraflop beast and the PS5 is a 35 teraflop monster, I did not know that any of that information has been out there. Is that even actually true? I don't know. Does it even make sense for Nintendo to release a Switch Pro anymore, or should they just focus on making great exclusives only? So, good question, comparing Nintendo to the next gen that we know is upon us sometime soon. And again, 35 teraflops for the PS5, is that confirmed anywhere? I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but I didn't think that we have anything actually specific on the PS5. And I'm no tech head, you guys know. I don't even know what teraflops are, but considering the fact that people are treating 12 teraflops as a big deal for the Series X, something tells me that the PS5 doesn't have more than double that at 35 teraflops. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know this stuff. Everything about that seems weird to me. So if we step aside from the whole teraflop battle between PlayStation and Xbox and focus on the other part of your question, does it make sense for Nintendo to release a Switch Pro or to just make exclusives? I mean, at this point, I actually think until their next generation machine, it does make sense for them to just make great exclusives. It's a really well-focused question, despite the teraflop thing, right? The Switch Pro, I don't even know what to say about the Switch Pro anymore, you guys, because at first, I didn't want to believe it. Like going back to like a year or two ago. And then I started to believe it more and more. It made more sense. Rumors kept happening. And then the Switch Mini was real and we saw the Switch Lite. And so then it was like, okay, a Switch Pro probably is going to happen. But now we have a Nintendo that's been quiet for a very long time. 2020 is totally weird because of the big health situation that's got the video game industry ground almost completely to a halt. There's now rumors that even the Series X and PS5 might get delayed to 2021 anyway. And so when you factor in the whole idea of Nintendo making a Switch Pro, it's like, should they do that? Would they do that? Is there a chance that they were planning on doing it and maybe now, because of the delay and the slowing down of the video game industry, that they decide to just scrap the idea outright? Because if they planned on releasing a Switch Pro in 2020, but now because of this big situation, they would also be delaying that to like next year or something, does that mean that would put us so much closer to their next-gen machine that the Switch Pro has less of a reason to be on the market because it's going to have less time on the market? I already think that there might not be much time of a Switch Pro in the market, even if they did it this year. And so it's just really tough to figure out what Nintendo may or may not want to do with the idea of a Switch Pro. And this is coming from somebody who, started off the Switch Pro journey not believing in it and slowly began to believe in it as the years went on, probably year and a half or 2 years or whatever. I started to realize, yeah, it probably is going to happen. It does make sense. I am starting to believe the rumors and the behind the scenes things I hear. But 2020 is a game changer. It's changed everything that everyone in gaming is looking at and what all three companies are planning to do with their games and their hardware and Nintendo Directs and all these different things. Really tough to say. And so I would say, yeah, Nintendo, you know what? Even if you were going to do a Switch Pro, don't do one. Just forget about it. Who cares? Whatever. Don't do a Switch Pro. Make your next gen machine in 2022, and until then, just give us more great games and Nintendo first-party franchises and exclusives on the Switch between now and then. To me, that's what I want the most. That makes me the most excited, and I think it would be the smartest thing for Nintendo to do, given the weirdness of 2020 and how everything is just basically stopped moving forward. The next question comes from Kieran A. Buckley at KABuckley3 on Twitter, and he says, how would you feel about a new 2D Metroid in the style of 2D Zelda games? Now, this actually came up, I think Kieran also asked me this in my live stream the other day, and I probably answered it for like 60 seconds. I thought it's an interesting question, and I found it here on Twitter also, and so I figured I would kind of discuss this here. Initially, when I think of comparing like 2D Metroid to 2D Zelda, I want to be like, yeah, that sounds great. I mean, of course, we've already had that. Think of games like Metroid and Super Metroid and, Samus Returns and Zero Mission, like all these 2D side-scrolling Metroid games. That's great, Metroid. Let's do more of that. But then I had to realize, oh, wait a minute, but he compared it to 2D Zelda. And that means that with one exception, those have always been top-down 2D games, right? With Zelda and A Link to the Past, Link Between Worlds, stuff like that. Only really Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link was it side-scrolling like a Metroid game. And so if they were going to do a 2D Metroid game, even with maybe a modern art style that would be top-down, how would I feel about that? Well, I mean, I don't really want that. It doesn't initially get me excited. I mean, I guess like the curiosity part of my brain wonders what that would be like. So in that sense, yeah, I would like to see it just to see what a top-down 2D Metroid game would even look like or play like. I guess I'm curious about it. I don't really desire it. But here's the thing, and I did talk about this a little bit on my live stream, and I've brought this up in the past as well. When it comes to Metroid, we think of the main games, and then we think of the spin-off games. And a spin-off game being like a Metroid Pinball or a Metroid Prime Federation Force, something like that. And sometimes spin-off games are not great, and they make people really upset. To me, a great example of that actually is Metroid Prime Federation Force, because Federation Force was revealed at a time where we hadn't seen Metroid in a long time, and we were waiting for a new Metroid game. There was a drought for 5 years at that time, and we were all waiting to just see Metroid come to the Wii U. We all thought for sure we were going to have a Metroid game on the Wii U at some point in 2015. Turns out that didn't happen, and instead they give us Metroid Prime Federation Force, a game for the 3DS that focuses on multiplayer and co-op, and that doesn't even have Samus. It's like, what the hell are you doing, Nintendo? Give us a real Metroid game. So that game was a problem. But today, we live in a world where we had Metroid Samus Returns only 2 years ago, and we have Metroid Prime 4 being made. So Nintendo is making regular Metroid games as we see them now. They're giving us Samus-focused Metroid games. And so if they wanted to do a weird experimental spin-off of a 2D top-down Metroid game like a Zelda game, even if it's terrible, it's not going to bother me. I'm not going to be like, oh my god, Nintendo, you're wasting all this time on this game, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, they're not wasting any time. They just wrapped up Samus Returns. That game was great. They're making Metroid Prime 4. I'm all about it. You know, even with the delay, that's like a unique situation that normally doesn't happen, so that I can't really count that against them per se. And so the idea of a 2D Metroid game that's top-down, I'm curious, you know, and if they did make it with like a modern graphic style and a modern engine and modern mechanics, only top-down, there is a chance it actually could be really cool too. So yeah, I like to think about it. It's not something I need or want, but would I like to see it? Sure. Next question comes from Brian Preston at X Demonics, and he asks me, if you could have one LucasArts game redone for modern generations, what would it be? And he says for him, it's a tough call, but it would be the GameCube Rogue Squadron would be it. That's a really great choice, and I'm not going to lie. One of them for me would absolutely be one or all of the 3 Rogue Squadron games, because those are amazing. There's Rogue Squadron, there's Rogue Leader, and there's Rebel Strike. Those are all really, really good. I mean, Rogue Leader, of course, is the best. But any one of those games would be great, and, you know, there's been weird things with Factor 5 and redoing those games, and the 4th one they were making for the Wii, and it all got canceled, and then they closed down, and it's just a big tragic story, unfortunately. But yes, I'd love to see those. I have 2 on opposite ends of the spectrum here. I have one very story-based Star Wars game and one not story-based Star Wars game. The story-based one is obvious, right? And it's KOTOR. It's Knights of the Old Republic. Hello. Please remake that game, or even like, I mean, obviously KOTOR 3 would be great. But if they were to remake that or redo it and just, I don't know, bring it into the modern generation in some way, similar to the way maybe Capcom did with Resident Evil 2, for example, that would be the dream. Oh my god, make KOTOR happen, please. That would be so fantastic. The non-story based one would be Star Wars Episode 1 Pod Racer, because that's a great damn game. I mean, it didn't age very well. I even played it a couple of months ago on my buddy's N64 for fun. We were all hanging out and having drinks, and it's like, let's play Pod Racer. And it's really hard, but it also, like, the design of that game is still really great, and it just reminds me of the amazing era when the prequel trilogy movies were releasing, and Star Wars excitement was, like, at an all-time high, and there were so many Star Wars video games coming out in that era, you guys. So much, man. The LucasArts era and the George Lucas era. Oh, my heart sings for those days, man. It was so great. And that Pod Racer game was one of the coolest ones. There was so much imagination behind it. You could play as Anakin, but you could also play as all the other racers from the pod race scene in The Phantom Menace. And just so many tracks and courses and so many pods. It was just awesome. And so, and they, you know, they kind of made some sequels like on the PS2 and stuff, and they tried to recapture that magic. But the original game for the N64 and the Dreamcast has never been topped. And so, you know, making a new one of those could be very cool. But also, if they were going to redo the original and make it good for today's standards, that would be incredible. So those are my 2 answers. It's Knights of the Old Republic and Star Wars Episode 1 Pod Racer. And today's last question comes from Timbo at Red Soul Walker. And Timbo asks me, despite the success of the Switch, I feel like there haven't been many new first-party IPs since ARMS. Do you think we may see something more experimental over the next couple of years? If so, what styles/gameplay would you like to see Nintendo take a stab at? Now this is a good question, and it's an important question, because I do think that Nintendo does need to start experimenting with new IPs quite a bit more. It's been a while since they've really done it, and, you know, the last one they did do is ARMS, to their credit, you know, to basically launch the Nintendo Switch. And ARMS is fine. It's a very well-crafted game, and it's cool and cute and kind of fun for what it is. But it didn't really do much for me at the end of the day. It looked amazing, but I didn't really care about it, and it's not that engrossing or engaging, and it's also focused on multiplayer stuff. I want to see Nintendo do more IPs that are more about just a single-player amazing experience. Like, imagine the same Nintendo that created Zelda and Metroid and Pikmin and Mario and Kid Icarus and games like that making another new IP. You know, and Xenoblade is kind of a curious franchise, the way that fits into Nintendo IPs, because they're monolith games, but it's like all owned by Nintendo and published by Nintendo. So that's like a Nintendo IP, but even that was introduced in 2012. And so it's like, I want them to make another game like that. I don't really want another hardcore JRPG. I don't need too many of those in my life. Xenoblade is fine for me, but I don't know. I mean, Nintendo, I think, does need to do more. I mean, when they came out with Pikmin, that was such a great new Nintendo-like IP, and it's not about just, you know, multiplayer games that work in like a round-based system, the way Splatoon and Smash Brothers and Mario Kart and ARMS do. It's like they've got so many multiplayer-focused IPs, and like they're all really good, but I want something more like a Zelda or a Metroid. And so, you ask me what styles or gameplay I'd like to see. That's so hard to even think about. I mean, because, I mean, who could have predicted what Pikmin is, right? Who could have ever predicted that? It's like impossible to predict that. I would like to see them do something more fantasy-based, like a Zelda, but different. I would like to see them do something a little bit more focused on an older audience. I think that's the thing I would like. I love their stuff that's focused on young audiences. I love Pikmin. I love Mario, Donkey Kong. Like, I love those games. And I'm always willing to welcome more of them. But one of the things I would like to see them do is another thing like what Metroid is. And do something a little bit more, not necessarily mature. I'm not talking about a mature game with blood and swearing and stuff. That's not what I want to see Nintendo make. But I do think that Metroid skews older, and it's kind of about like being cool a little bit. You know, it's got like a cool sort of veneer to it. And I like that stuff. And so I want to see Nintendo do more things like that. I honestly think something that they could do, and this kind of veers away from your question here, but I actually think that if they were going to continue the Star Fox brand and even kind of revive it a little bit, I think that there could be a future where they make a Star Fox game also veering a little bit older and try to make it a little bit cooler, you know? I mean, if you guys understand the way I'm trying to use the word cool, you know, I think that there's a way for them to make Star Wars, listen to me, Star Fox appeal to like an older audience and kind of like bring the family element away from Star Fox a little bit and make it something a little bit focused at like a teen kind of audience. I think that could be really sweet, and I think that the series could probably thrive that way. But still, as far as new IPs go, I don't know, man. I just think that there's a lot that Nintendo could do, and I miss when they were more experimental back in the day, particularly in the GameCube era. And I know people might not think that's experimental because it was just a regular console trying to compete on the power level with the other guys. And then, you know, you think of the Wii, where it's like, well, the Wii was experimental because of the Wii remote and all that stuff. And that's very true. But I'm talking less on the hardware experimental front. I mean more on the software experimental front, when they would just make and come out with crazy, weird ideas and games and stuff, and something that they would try to make a big splash with. And so I want something a little bit more cooler and a little bit, you know, skewing a little bit more older. I really would like to see that, you know? Something with more human characters. Like, the only real human character IP they have is Metroid, because every other IP features non-human characters. Zelda's close, but those characters aren't really human, right? They're like elves or whatever, you know? Star Fox isn't human. I guess Mario characters are human, but they're also like cartoony, anthropomorphic like designs, you know, they're like goofy, exaggerated designs. it's not the same. Anthropomorphic, I think, is animal-related stuff, so forget that I used that word. But you know what I mean. I mean something that's trying to be a little bit more real, but still has a Nintendo flair to the design, which is Metroid. And so, obviously, I want Nintendo to do more stuff like that, as well as things like a Pikmin. You know, I want them to make a new game that's more in the direction of Pikmin, and then also a new game that's more in the direction of Metroid. I think that's it, you know. Why not make 2 new IPs, Nintendo? You don't have to make 1 new IP every decade. You could make 2 IPs in 1 year. You could do that. And so, yeah, I don't know. I guess that's what I want to see. So that's it for today. A couple of more questions for the Q&A that I wanted to answer for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this and found this fun. I do really enjoy doing these, like I said. And, of course, if you want to be a part of these in the future, definitely make sure that you're following me on Twitter, because that's where I always put the call-outs for, and I'm always interacting with you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Please let me know your thoughts and opinions on the questions I answered and the answers that I had to them. I do want to hear what you think about all of this stuff. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.